This was 2 years ago. I had gone to visit my parents, something I do fairly regularly since they live only a town away, and I was driving back home. We live in a rural area of the South where everything is spaced out and you have to drive a ways to get to other towns. It was about 8:30 at night, I'd guess, though I can't remember exactly. I was on a dirt road that people use as a shortcut between towns. It takes about 30 minutes to drive from one town to the other, so this part of the road is basically in the middle of nowhere, just woods. I came around a bend, and ahead of me was what looked like a large log that had fallen across the road. What was strange was that this log had not been there when I drove to my parents' house earlier in the day. But these things do happen out here on occasion in these rural areas. So I got out of my car and inspected the log. It looked like a dead tree had just rotted away and fallen across the road. I'm a pretty big guy, and even though it was too large to drive around, the wood itself was old and dry and surprisingly easy to move. I began to drag the log out of the way when I happened to look over my shoulder at my car, and what I saw still terrifies me to this day. Beyond my headlights, in the red light of my vehicle's taillights, there was a man's face looking back at me. He had a surprised look on his face, like he hadn't expected me to turn and see him. He had scraggly hair, and it looked like his clothes were very dirty. I immediately dropped the log, stood up and asked, "Can I help you?" There was this long silence where both of us just stood there looking at each other. Then out of nowhere, the man just ran across the road and into the woods. I didn't know what to do, so I just ran to my vehicle, got in, and hit the gas. I had moved the log enough so that I was able to drive around it, and as soon as I was down the road a bit, I called the police. They said they would look into it, but I never heard anything back from them. What was even more disturbing is that as he ran, I could see that it looked like he was carrying some kind of weapon, like a club. I haven't driven down that road since and still wonder to this day what would have happened to me if I hadn't looked over at my car at the exact moment that I did. I live in a not-so-great area and had just broken up with my girlfriend, whom I'd been in a relationship with for 5 years. We decided that I would be the one to move out because her salary could cover the full rent of the place that we had been sharing, whereas I would need to find something on a smaller budget. It was really hard finding a new place that was safe and affordable, but I found an ad for an apartment on Craigslist where the current tenant was looking for a sublet. It seemed like a pretty good deal, and it was in an area that wasn't quite as bad as the others that were in my price range. I guess the tenant had some sort of job where they traveled a lot and wanted somebody who could pick up the rent while they were away. It wasn't a long-term solution, but I needed something quickly that would buy me some time while I looked for a better option. I picked up the key from the tenant and moved my stuff in, most of which just stayed in boxes. My routine is pretty standard. I work during the days, but sometimes get scheduled for the evening shift and don't arrive home until late. I worked, drove back, and relaxed until I got tired and went to bed. The new apartment was mostly fine, but as the tenant had warned me, there were some pretty noisy pipes in the walls that could bang around a little when the heat was on this time of year. But overall, it was fine for now. I basically just needed a place to sleep and eat until I found something better. On this particular night, I had to work the closing shift, so I didn't get home until probably 1:30 a.m. I was so tired, all I wanted to do was just eat something quickly and lay down. So I microwaved a frozen meal, locked the place up, and went right to bed. The next thing I remember is waking up with this weird feeling that to this day I can't really describe. It was like my mind was telling me to wake up even though my body was still completely exhausted and wanted to keep sleeping. but there was a sound. At first, I thought it was the pipes in the wall and closed my eyes to go back to bed. But as I was laying there, I noticed it sounded different. This was almost like a jingle or metal pieces rubbing together. It was very quiet, but sounded like it was coming from inside the bedroom. I leaned up in bed to listen, and immediately the sound stopped. I remember all I could hear was my heartbeat, and that the silence in the room was so intense that it made my ears feel hot. I reached out and fumbled around, trying to find the lamp on the nightstand, but by accident I hit the lampshade, and before I could get my hand on the power button, the sound of keys dropping to the floor froze me in place. I just waited and listened. Then I heard the door to my bedroom quietly open and footsteps begin running down the hall to the front door. I found the light and snapped it on, and saw my clothing scattered all over the floor and the closet door open, which I had never even bothered to use since it was furnished with the tenant's things. I got up and ran to the front door, closing and locking it behind me. When I turned all the lights on, I could see that someone had gone through my things, opening up boxes like they were looking for something. They had taken my wallet as well. The scariest part was the set of keys on the floor in the bedroom. They weren't mine, but when the police tried them in the door, they were a perfect match for the apartment. Obviously, my thoughts went to the current tenant, but the police were never able to prove anything, and he had an alibi for that night. It goes without saying that I moved out of that apartment immediately, but have a terrible time sleeping now and am constantly terrified someone will be in the room with me when I wake up in the night. In high school, my friend and I would sneak out of our parents' houses during the summer and go driving down the back roads, listening to music and partying. Don't judge us, but my friend would also do this stupid thing, a game where he would turn off the headlights and drive by the moonlight for brief sections of road to scare me whenever I was in the passenger seat. I know, it's extremely stupid and dangerous. One night, it was after midnight, and we were making our way back to his house to crash for the night. We lived in the country, so we were taking very windy, slow dirt roads to avoid the cops on the paved roads and more populated areas. To be honest, we were a bit lost at this point and just trying to find our way back to some sort of landmark. Eventually, things flattened out and we approached this wide open area, basically some sort of farmland with a fenced-in field on the left and woods on the right. My friend was driving and turned off the headlights as we were approaching an intersection ahead, where another dirt road ran parallel to ours. He thought it was funny. As we rolled up to the intersection, he flicked on the headlights and we noticed a vehicle far down the road on the left. We could see that it was a truck and that it was parked in the middle of the road, which we thought was weird. The passenger door was open and the lights were off. We were only aware of it because when our headlights flicked on, they reflected and glinted off the truck. At that moment, from behind the truck on the passenger side, there were two loud pops and the muzzle flashes from what we assumed were a pistol. We immediately peeled out, turning in the opposite direction from the vehicle, and started driving away as fast as we could without losing control or fishtailing off the road. The lights of the truck immediately turned on and they began to pursue us. I just remember panicking and being terrified that we would either crash and die or crash and be caught by whoever was driving that truck. By some grace, we managed to come across a road that we recognized. We bolted down it and off some side roads until we were confident that we were no longer being followed. We kept an eye on the news for the next couple weeks, but never caught any mention of a missing person or body being found. We are still convinced that we stumbled across something terrible that night, and I cannot tell you how scared I was while we were driving for our lives.